sessions, and welcome to the new folks. I hope everyone had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. Let me just briefly let you know what we're going to be doing today. Again, I will speak for about 15 minutes or so. Again, just an overview of Thomas Merton's thoughts and writings about experiences of spirituality and contemplation. And then following that, we will look at a couple, two selections from Merton's writings. And then hopefully we'll have a lot of time for your sharing your own reflections and so forth. And then if we have more time, just opening it up to questions you may have. Like I have said before, I'm not an expert on Thomas Merton, but I have certainly have had a close relationship through him in my own spiritual journey and have read several of his books. And so many books are continuing to be written by authors about Merton, various facets of his life and his writings. So as we begin, Thomas Merton was considered to be one of the great spiritual masters, mystics, and writers of the 20th century. Thousands of people have found in Merton a spiritual mentor, guide, and a roadmap for their spiritual journeys. They have developed a relationship with Merton through his writings and also by making retreats, silent retreats at the Abbey of Gethsemane, where Merton lived his monastic life. I consider myself one of those individuals, and I suspect that many of you are the same. So yes, this is the third session on Merton that I've given. We have briefly looked at Merton, his life, and his writings on social justice, peace and war, racism in our first session. In session 2, we reviewed a few of his writings in engagement in inter-religious dialogue. In this third session, we want to consider Merton's thought on spirituality and contemplation. In a very real sense, Merton integrated his response to the social conditions of the 60s and his interaction with both Christian and non-Christian leaders and personalities in his practice of and writings on spirituality and contemplation. As you become more familiar with Merton and his writings, you'll see how it's all connected. In order to best understand Merton and learn from his teachings and writings, it is important to have some familiarity with his life experiences, his biography, especially his conversion experiences and his spiritual journey after entering monastic life at Gethsemane. And I have shared with you some of his book titles and so forth. And if you've had a chance to visit the website of the Merton Center, merton.org, and especially the page on the International Thomas Merton Society, you're going to find a wealth of information, bibliographies on Merton and his books. And they can, like I mentioned, they continue to be written. It's amazing how this individual still has impact and importance to addressing all of our 20th century issues and political, social consciousness concerns, spirituality, and especially interreligious dialogue. Merton of the 40s and early 50s is not the same Merton of the late 50s and 60s. He experienced a transformation of personal perspectives and consciousness. He had a spiritual hunger in seeking God that shifted from a traditional view and approach to one that included a realization of the presence of God in all human persons and creation. Merton developed a personal spirituality that was both directed outward to the world and the human condition, and inward, exploring the dynamics of the interior life, a life of contemplation. With the ongoing publications of his written work, he is assisting in guiding so many people in identifying their own unique spirituality. Merton was well-read and educated in the Christian tradition, scripture, the early church fathers, Christian history and philosophy, Spanish mystics of the 16th century. He studied theology in preparation of his ordination as a priest while at Gethsemane. He received both undergraduate and graduate degrees in English at Columbia University. The poetry of the English poet Gerard Manley Hopkins was a primary factor in his conversion to Catholicism. He writes about that in his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. There are other factors, but that was one because he was so interested in English authors and eventually American authors, notably William Faulkner. He really became an American and he was always interested in every aspect of our national and community life. He developed such an energy and energized compassion of humanity. In some sense, he has been called a prophet for our time. Merton's spiritual writings and journals chronicle his ongoing spiritual growth, which provides a model for self-transcendence and transformation for all of us. In comparing his early writings and later writings, it can be observed that he acquired different views of God, humanity, the world, and other religions throughout the course of his life. In his later writings, he modified his early view of contemplation and suggested that the different forms of contemplation do not depend on one's identity, but on the diversity of God's gifts to all of humanity and the different capacity of each person for contemplative experience. He opened up the monastery doors. He had profound impact in the reforming of Christian monasticism, bringing it out of the Middle Ages and into the modern world. He speaks about lay contemplatives, which were very supportive to us who have always had some interest in monastic spirituality. He said, this life is not just for monks and nuns who entered cloistered monasteries, but he really believed that all of us had the capacity to experience contemplation, everyone. And he found evidence of it in his extensive reading of world cultures and so forth. He really could say that we are all one, but we don't realize that we are, for the most part. Most commentators on Merton, those who have been writing about him, are in agreement that the primary objective of his spiritual journey was focused on union with God or with the great mystery, however we conceptualize divinity. In this process or journey, Merton experienced three main transformations of consciousness. The first, from that of a non-believer, agnostic in his early teenage and early young adult time, but a non-believer, to a Catholic, Roman Catholic, with an awareness of God's presence in the church. That was the change. And also, there was a transformation from a traditional view of contemplation to a modern view of contemplation with an awareness of God's presence in all humanity, which I just said. And also from a solely Western Christian consciousness to a universal religious consciousness with an awareness of God's immanence in the created order and all of creation. In this process, Merton's inner mystical experiences aided his conversion to Catholicism, his overcoming of various psychological and spiritual frustrations, which he had many. He ran into many barriers, especially with institutions, both in government and religion, in his own order. But he was patient and worked through that. Then his integration of contemplation and action, those are two components that need to be very much present in our experience, he felt. His becoming open to others and his diversity of a new path for Buddhist Christian dialogue. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. This is just a profound, his contribution has had in this area of Buddhist Christian dialogue has had profound impact. Merton saw the values and possibility of contemplative dialogue between monastics of different religious traditions. That's kind of where he got started. Those men and women who look primarily to a transformation of human consciousness and a spiritual awakening from within their respective traditions. In a state of transcultural maturity, he believed that we are already one and that contemplative dialogue could help to retrieve our spiritual unity in diversity. A recent author on Merton and his encounter with Buddhism late in his life, the author is Jae-chan Park. He is a Japanese monk, New Christian monk, states that in Merton's contemplative life, spiritual transformation through inner experience was deeply connected to his understanding of religious dialogue and the method he proposed for engaging in it. This led to more openness to others that was complemented by openness to and dialogue with other religions, especially Buddhism. This in turn brought him to a deeper inner experience of other religious traditions and in a deeper appreciation of contemplation of the Christian tradition. In order to express and interpret his inner experience of contemplation, Merton made use of various concepts taken from Buddhist spirituality. He realized that Buddhists and Christians could be mutually enriched by exchanging their different ways of expressing contemplative experience, unquote, from Park. Merton created a new paradigm for interreligious dialogue. As a monk himself, he easily appreciated and identified with certain Buddhist practices. He could see that monasticism was profoundly embedded in Asian religions. Their various forms of monasticism are a treasured traditional religious way that can cultivate a contemplative, enlightened, or spiritual transformed experience. In his correspondence with the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, Thich Nhat Hanh commented early on, says, "We are brothers." That had obviously profound impact on Merton and that sense of connectiveness. So Buddhists and Christians could be mutually enriched by exchanging their different ways of expressing inner experience. Merton realized that the Spirit of God transcended religious systems. His progress to the final integration through his inner experience contributed to the development of a fruitful, ongoing dialogue between Buddhists and Christians on a deep spiritual and universal level. In the mid-1990s, intermonastic dialogue encounters began to occur regularly and hosted by the Abbey of Gethsemani. And these encounters were attended by both Buddhist and Christian monks. They continue to occur today in different locations. And there's information about all of that at the Merton Center and so forth. So Merton died in Bangkok, Thailand, during his, on December 10th, December 10th, 1968, during his Asian journal, to participate in conferences of both Eastern, Christian, and Buddhist monks. And so happens that he entered monastic life at Gethsemani 27 years earlier on the same date of December 10th, 1941. So that's the comments I wanted to share with you. I want to also point out and highly, highly recommend some titles to give you a broader understanding of Merton's thought and his experiences, and that being New Seeds of Contemplation, and we're going to look at an excerpt from that in a few minutes. Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. That will blow you out of the water. I mean, it's Merton at his best. And also the impact of the last few months of Merton's life in his Asian journey. He left Gethsemani in September 1968, not to attend these Asian conferences, but that's when he had his opportunity to meet with and have several conversations with the Dalai Lama. He journaled his entire life, but especially his Asian journal, his last journal. That's a gem, and I highly recommend that. Okay. Well, Geneva, if you want to put up show the readings, I will go ahead and just read it for those who may not be able, just to take a few minutes for your own, you're gathering your own thoughts.
Can everyone see the slide?
Okay, yes. And hoping that it will generate and interest you of sharing some thoughts you have as participants. Merton writes, contemplation is life itself. Fully awake, fully active, fully aware that it is alive. It is spiritual wonder. It is spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, of being. It is gratitude for life, for awareness, and for being. It is a vivid realization of the fact that life and being in us proceed from an invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source. Contemplation is above all awareness of the reality of that source. Notice the capitalization of source. It knows the source obscurely, inexplicably, with a certitude that goes beyond reason and beyond simple faith. It is a more profound depth of faith, a knowledge too deep to be grasped in images, in words, or even in clear concepts. When I first read that many, many years ago, it just puts you in ecstasy, so to speak. It does. That is the most profound definition of contemplation, I think, that any of us, and all those who've been reading spiritual authors from different traditions, can appreciate. That is. So here are two suggestions, beginning with number one. Choose a phrase or two from Merton's definitions of contemplation that seem especially meaningful to you, that you might share with all of us. And Geneva, you want me to read the next section? Or you may choose to share with participants a few thoughts about experiences you have had that may have been moments of contemplation. So I am going to sit back and listen and take some notes, because I like to hear people's reactions and reflections.
So feel free to respond to either question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can comment in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
This is Barbara. I love the line, it's spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, of being. I think somehow in this COVID isolation, distancing, it has made me much more aware of the beauty and the awe of things in nature, and it is all quite spontaneous awe when I see different things on my walk.
Thank you.
Yes, I liked that. This is Martha. I liked those words too, and also had the same thought that the awe at nature. We have a pileated woodpecker that's been coming to our feeder. Was just there a little bit ago. They're just very awesome creatures, and it seemed very sacred to me. I also like the fully awake phrase, because there's a song going around now called "Wake Me Up When It's All Over." I don't know if you've heard it. There's a number of different versions of it, but I think it is tempting in this time of isolation and not being able to go anywhere or see anybody, to just want to sleep and kind of shut down. So I really appreciate this quote in this program, because contemplation is certainly another way through this time. And, I want to, it's also tempting to use, substances like wine or overeating or something like that as a way of coping. And so I feel that's really a deadening kind of approach. And so I really like the idea of being fully awake, fully alive. So that's what hit me out of this.
Thank you.
My name is Sandy.
Go ahead,
I'm
Sandy.
Sandy. I really had a hard time pulling one line out of that paragraph. I just really related to it in many different ways. The first sentence, of course, and then the last sentence. It's more profound depth of faith, knowledge, too deep for words, images, or even clear concepts. I'm reminded that we're all kind of isolated now because of COVID, but I tend to have a contemplative nature. I don't mind being alone, and I don't mind just sitting in my thoughts and wondering. But COVID has given me an opportunity to do that even more. And so I'm like most people, I can't wait till it's over, but I'm certainly looking at the gifts that it had brought in spite of itself, I guess.
Mhm. Thank you.
This is Andy. I also was moved by that last sentence. As a brainy intellectual, I'm a recovering academic, and the images, words, and clear concepts have been my stock in trade as an academic, though not as a psychotherapist. I mean, it evokes a frame of mind that's familiar to me from conducting psychotherapy professionally, where you when you're in the presence of another person, and I have this sense of contemplation when I'm in the presence of another person, not trying to figure them out or help them, but just trying to be in their presence. I have that same sense of a knowing that's too deep to be grasped in images, words, or clear concepts. And I'm very thankful that nobody is asking me to write a treatment summary or something at that point, because the difficulty of translating later that sense of reverence when you really manage to get in the presence of another person is part of the aftermath of contemplation for me. That sense of it being too deep, too great, and bringing it home is always the problem for me. I quickly get distracted into images, words, and clear concepts, and I deeply appreciate the idea that there is this place that we can stand, which Merton is calling contemplation. There are other names for it, where we're not depending on those things for our nourishment.
This is Dorothy. I'm just so grateful to all of the contributions because you've all added so much to this notion of what contemplation is for me. And especially the last Andy's comment on the sense of presence, because presence to me is a very much of a felt experience. And it's a awareness of a reality that is there that's so much more than an intellectual a grasped concept. I can get pretty excited over really profound truths and really profound goodness. But when it comes to contemplation, it's like a combination, excuse me, a combination of all of that. And I think that sense of reality, the real, is what this speaks to me about.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
My name is Rebecca, and I just want to follow up with that. I'm reflecting back. So I have a group of girlfriends here where I live, and every year we do a girlfriends giving. And one of the women in my community is really the catalyst for us kind of coming together and gathering together, and really she puts heart and love into bringing us together. And last year, Andy, what you said and the words that are written resonate with me, because I think that the idea that we try not to structure this source and put words or images or structure to the source is, I find myself when I am with others and even at times alone, that really the source is, there's movement associated with the source. And last year, when I find myself open to feeling urges or calls to do things. Last year, we were gathered in a restaurant, hugging each other. My friend, I looked down at my friend's speech that she wrote that was so beautiful, was just laying on the table. And I felt this urge to walk around and have everybody sign it that was there. And everybody looked at me like I had 6 heads, right? They were like, what on earth? Everybody's going to remember. We've got a picture. We see each other all the time. And I found that as I was looking through things last week and gave it to my friend this year. And it's one of those things that's like, when you're in that state, when you're able to be in a place and be present and be in that state, and you are open to the energy that comes from that source, that really is the catalyst for love and action in the world. So I just love the way that this is written and the idea of thinking about it in that way.
My name is Patty, and I'm sorry I missed the first 2. I just found out about this today, but yeah, the line that really hit me was, it knows the source obscurely, inexplicably, and with a certitude that goes beyond reason and beyond simple faith. I first became involved with Eastern philosophy and meditation many decades ago, partly because as a way of dealing with chronic physical illness. And I found that it totally expanded my life and my comfort in life, in terms of feeling like I belonged in it, regardless of what other issues I had. But it also deepened my original faith. The problem I keep running into, I was in a different parish at that time, and that parish there was definitely something that wouldn't work. And I'm now in a more, I would say, liberal parish. It's an art city where I live. But yeah, once again, especially under the harsh scope of COVID, it seems to be a point of contention. It isn't like I walk around talking about it, but I think having come to that sensibility, I believe it tends to radiate from me a little bit. which I find scares people who are more, or who are invested in black and white rules. I've actually been told that meditation is a sin. It's against the catechism. I've been told all these things, but, and I was just like, I stopped in, my church has just been all, refurbished, and I stopped in to take a look at it. And I came in with my mask on, and I was lectured at length by a woman who announced to me, I go everywhere without a mask. I've never been infected. I've never infected anyone else. And it's not all it's cracked up to be. And I was just kind of flabbergasted. And I said, well, I mean, it is real. What about the people that are dying? What about the people becoming homeless or having food insecurity? And she said, in a way that felt smug to me, God knows what he's doing. And I just thought, that is the opposite of knowing. I mean, that's the opposite of going beyond reason and faith. That's like, I'm fine, so everybody else has to worry about. God must have a plan for everybody else. I just don't understand that. And it feels a disconnect with my grounding in this understanding of oneness. Does anybody else run into that, or am I just somehow?
Oh, it's everywhere. I have it in
Yeah.
my own family, and I just, I try to not judge and try to figure out where they're coming from. I was thinking as we were talking about meditation, and Patty, you said something about it. It was unchristian, and I'm thinking of all the times Jesus withdrew.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure he wasn't verbally praying all night, or, that it was a time of just spending time alone with God. And so I take that as an encouragement, not a discouragement.
I just find it hard to maintain that sense of community. I was with somebody when I did this morning, and I said, I can't go back there and sit with these people because I know that is a widespread perspective, and it causes a feeling of cognitive dissonance with me.
How do you think she would, how do you
And
think
cognitive dissonance is extremely, it's one of the things that I find most difficult to cope with, because it feels very fracturing to me.
how do you think they might feel about a recommendation for something to read, like something from Thomas Merton?
I don't know. I always thought Thomas Merton was fairly well respected in the Catholic Church, but I'm getting the idea that no, he's controversial, is he?
He has been very controversial. I'm not as much now as he was back when he made that kind of switch, when he was enlightened, so to speak, around 1960, that he wasn't Catholic enough, was one of the criticisms.
Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm getting, is that
Yeah.
I'm off the range somehow, So I don't know. I mean, I would certainly take down a recommendation, but I have a feeling that I'm just not among people. I'm among people that are scared of me and that are convinced that I'm some kind of a wildcat.
Yeah. I was just going to interject a comment. You all may recall a few years ago when Pope Francis visited the United States and made an address to Congress, spoke to Congress, and he pointed out 4 Americans for their contributions to the American experience, beginning with Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, and Thomas Merton in Congress. And of course, those of us who were Merton fans, the hair of the back of our necks standing up a little bit.
And Martin Luther King and Dorothy Day as well. Dorothy Day was one of my earliest heroes. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. So,
Yes.
Lloyd, did you actually have a recommendation you wanted to offer me?
No, I was just just curious about what you thought if someone, with that viewpoint would be open to, taking a look at some of the things you're reading and have been influenced by.
Yeah, I can't get that deep a conversation. Like I said, if somebody immediately tells you that's a sin when you're talking about meditation, there's not a whole lot of places to go other than an argument, and I'm not there for that. I mean, I don't mind having a reasoned debate, but if you're just going to be told you're bad, you're wrong, get out of here, there's not a whole lot of reason to pursue that. I don't have that much influence.
Yeah, I
This is
guess
Brian.
I could get it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike.
This
What'd
is
you say?
Brian. This is Brian. I have a question.
Yes.
When Merton refers in this paragraph to that invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source, is he specifically referring to God? Or is this some reference to something else more internal to individuals?
I think he's making reference to sacred mystery that
Okay.
humanity is still exploring itself. And so I think would be quite open to science,
Mm-hmm.
and an understanding of the universe. There have been some Sufi masters, mystics writing recently. One that I'm aware of, Reza Aslan, which I highly recommend for your reading. His book titled God, A Human History. It is extremely spiritual in its nature, but we're looking at the human experience and are exploring, who am I? Why am I here? And where are we going? Basically.
Okay. Yes, and that
Yeah.
helps explain. That helps explain for me, at least, the previous person's comment about she was told it was a sin. I was raised Pentecostal holiness, and unless your meditation was specifically meditating on God or Christ, if you were meditating internally or to any of the other things you just mentioned to me, then that would have been considered to be a sin. Unless it's to God or Christ, there is nothing else. And so I can understand why the people in that Catholic church she was referring to responded to her in the way that they did. From their perspective, I can see where the response came from.
And that's been throughout history in the Catholic
Sure.
tradition, especially there's women, Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, who were saying basically similar thoughts here about the mystery of God and trying to define contemplation. Merton's, in fact, these are Merton words as far as we know it, but he was informed by his reading mystics through the century and then more contemporary mystics in all religious tradition. And with Buddhism, he hit the jackpot, so to speak. But yeah, he was very controversial. He challenged the US Catholic bishops several times, the US government in some decisions made, especially the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It was remarkable. And so he took risk. He was almost silenced a few times. Even within the Cistercian order, his own order that he was involved with. But you kind of think, if we're going to open up to the mystery of ourselves as human persons and everything that we're experiencing and finding, I think he would say contemplation so many folks confuse or when they think of contemplation, they automatically say, well, silence and solitude. You know, for those who are living in monasteries or hermits somewhere. No, I don't think that's what, these are tools to help us have a contemplative experience. Very much, he was very much, in fact, he lived the last 2 years at Gethsemane, he lived as a hermit. He lived, he was needed silence. He was seeking silence, not disconnecting from the world. I think what he's trying to say also would be my assessment that contemplation is also defined of how we see reality and how we see connectiveness of everything that is. When he's talking about one, it's not just among humanity, but it's about all creation. In fact, one of the most contemplative creatures I'm aware of is our pet cat in our home. I mean, if you would, you know, just to be with them in their silence and, you know, in their eyes watching them. And our dog is beginning to pick this up a little bit. It's the cat that seems to be the more silent, you know, and I've learned a lot from our cat. Also reading Merton, but I've learned, I have to give my cat a lot of credit.
I once had a priest go off on me, telling me, and that's one thing about being a woman in the Catholic Church. Somehow the priest always gets to tell you what you need, what you're supposed to be thinking and whether you're sinning. But he was adamant, no, there is no relationship, and that's why it's a sin, because the whole idea with meditation is your mind is supposed to not think or not have any thought in it. And I tried to explain to him about monkey mind and that that's not even possible. But no, he was adamant that no, he's studied this and the whole point is to have a completely blank mind. Ask your cat. Ask your cat if that mind is ever blank.
I think the problem with the institutional church is it has way too narrow understanding of what the word God is trying to say to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's got it all wrapped up in a definition, and there's no room for anything beyond that. And that's a problem.
Thirst for black and white. So all of this that we're talking about has to be kept out because it frightens them to death.
Yes.
This is Brian again. What I think he was referring to is that, at least from his perspective, people must be an empty vessel, as opposed to a blank mind in that literal concept, and an empty vessel to be receptive of whatever God has intended for you. And I think contemplation, as the way that Merton mentions it in this paragraph, can leave one more open to being receptive as an open vessel to whatever source is out there. But again, it's not purely black and white, I think, as he would have made it seem, but it leaves you open to be receptive to those things that you might otherwise keep out.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but that's been my experience, and I don't know how much it's affected by the fact that I'm a woman and therefore nobody in the Catholic Church, other than, you know, if I want to be on a pedestal, that's okay. But that wouldn't do my mind a whole lot of good. But yeah, that's my feeling, is there are so many people that are fear-based, and this is the opposite. Faith to me, the Gospels to me are the opposite of fear-based. But I don't know. And right now there's a very retro movement in the church as well. People want to go back to the comfort of pre-Vatican II. I don't know if they really remember that, how much better it got. And yes, of course, there's going to be, you know, some discomfort, but there's a strong movement back to pre-Vatican II. And they actually call, there's those of us who are still much more progressive, tend to refer to them as the trads, radical traditionalists.
Mhm.
Somebody else wanted to say something. They had their hand up. Was it Ian?
Yeah, Enoch has his hand up. Go ahead and jump in, Enoch.
Okay, yeah. Yes, would like to relate to some of the comments that was being made. You know, I was a pastor in the Pentecostal church, and then I become a Catholic, and I become a Jesuit. And there are different stratas and a different spectrum, you know, in both the Pentecostal tradition and the Catholic tradition, who are open to different type of contemplation or meditation. In the Pentecostal tradition, actually, there's been also some a lot of spiritual discipline, you know, in focusing, relating to the mystery in the universe and the mystery in ourselves. I think Karana was the one who said, you know, a lot of Pentecostal and charismatic movement is the mysticism of masses. On the other hand, you know, on the Catholic tradition, I have been in the Catholic Church for quite some time, and I noticed that, you know, it has been very speaking quite inspirationally, you know, to some of the Catholics coming from a little bit more progressive tradition. But there has been also, you know, some Catholics, both priests and lay, who has been a bit suspicious, you know, of things that are outside the traditional teaching of the church, or, well, not really outside the teaching, but it's not just the common practice, or even is common practice in the historical tradition of the mystic, but not in the historical tradition of the organizational church. So this is the first point that I would like to make. And the second point is in looking at Merton's statement, there are at least two things. You know, this one thing is it's almost like what Foucault was saying. You know, it's archaeology into the mystery deep inside common humanity. So in a way, you're digging into the common well, the well, you know, which is humanity, and by coming to the common well of humanity, you encounter mystery, whatever you call it, you know, God or divine. Yeah. So just would like to make comments like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that too. I think what Patty and other people have addressed is the fear that people have of having a sense of God that's not something that they can control or grasp. There's really a fear that's there when it comes to religious expression, that you don't have anything besides what you know, as your grandparents had handed down to you. And yet all of this has been part of the church, the early church, before it was Catholic, before it was divided. All of this is really totally orthodox and consistent with the teaching of Thomas Aquinas and Teilhard de Chardin, and, you know, so many other great teachers throughout the centuries. And the fact that we get some pushback from people, well, you know, Jesus didn't expect that all of his followers were going to have an easy pathway to really come to understand what his message is. In fact, if Christianity seems too easy, you must not be doing it right.
This is Andy Garrison again. I'm familiar with the distress that some people get in about contemplative forms of worship or spirituality. I'm a Quaker myself, and I'm very much aware of how difficult it is for some people to participate in Quaker meetings, which are based in my part of Quakerism, are based on heavily on waiting in a contemplative frame for inner leading and inner guidance. And if people liked that, there would be a lot more Quakers in the world. And there are fewer and fewer Quakers, I think, because there is so much responsibility on the attenders of a meeting to stay with a contemplative frame and open that frame broadly to other people and to the source, as Merton puts it, to something beyond themselves, something that they willingly relinquish control.
Thanks, Andy.
Did you want to look at that second reading reflection, Mike?
Okay.
Can I make one last statement? Because Andy just brought it up too. One of my all-time favorite, and it's a classic read, Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. It's called The Practice of the Presence of God. That's about as Martin as you could get. That's about as Eastern as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a line in there where he says, well, people say I say the same thing over and over again, and it's true. And it's that simple. It's like the practice of the presence of God. To me, that meshes precisely with that whole idea of source. So you just made me, you reminded me of that, because I recommend that book to so many people. But thank you, Andy.
Okay. Let's, our time remaining, let's look at the second, briefly at the second piece of writing of Merton. I wanted to point out from this excerpt from New Seeds of Contemplation, Merton wrote in 1962. If you would not know who the author was to this piece, I don't think you could identify any religious affiliation of the author of any kind. It is so broad. But now we're going to go back 20 years earlier. In 1941 or 42, after entering the monastic life at Gethsemane, this is Merton writing in his journal. And well, I'll wait till after I read it. And there's some interesting, comparing both of these pieces of Merton's writing is very interesting. But he writes in his journal, when your tongue is silent, you can rest in the silence of the forest. When your imagination is silent, the forest speaks to you, tells you of its unreality and the reality of God, in caps. But when your mind is silent, then the forest becomes magnificently real and blazes transparently with the reality of God. For now I know that the creation, which first seems to reveal him in concept, then seems to hide him by the same concepts, finally is revealed in him, in the Holy Spirit. And we who are in God find ourselves united in him with all that springs from him. This is prayer, and this is glory. So the point for reflection, Merton frequently referenced in his writings the natural world as a manifestation of the divine. I was just going to ask for those who, I think you already have in your previous comments, some of you, I was picking it up, share your experience of praying with nature. And then how do you experience silence, and solitude. Okay.
This is Becky.
Hi, Becky.
Hi. In my younger days, I used to run, and I ran around it was a reservoir in a park in Pittsburgh, and there were trees surrounding the reservoir. And so, you know, the seasons were in the foreground, like in your face, you know, and the colors were brilliant, and especially in the spring and the fall. And so I'd be running around this reservoir, and many times, all of a sudden, I would feel like I was really present to nature, and nature was present to me. And it was like a merger. And I don't know, those were very precious moments to me. I think that those were moments of contemplation for me.
Thank you.
Can I also share something? This is Enoch. Yes. I have always fascination with stargazing, gazing at stars. And I did a retreat in a Benedictine monastery in Northern California, and I saw Orion, you know, and also the nebula, you know, so besides it, actually within it, and it had always reminded me of the throne of God, as if, you know, Jesus was, you know, sitting there, and actually in my imagination, contemplating that, I saw him, you know, walking down and pouring some oil on earth, and actually on me as a healing oil and comfort oil. And it has been very significant for me. So next time, you know, when I was in distress, you know, sometimes in Australia, another time in Korea, you know, when I see Orion, see the belt, you know, the stars and the nebula, it has been very important to me, as if, you know, God is not only present, but he's gazing at me and gazing at this world, you know, which is suffering under COVID-19, you know, at this time. So yeah, and through other senses as well, you know, I like walking in among trees, and the smell of pines, you know, and the hearing, you know, the breezes, you know, the go through trees, you know, has always reminds me of the mystery and the beauty of God.
Yes. Thank you.
This question reminds me of experience I had a long time ago, about 40 years ago, and I was in seminary in Minneapolis, and was really struggling at the time for a number of reasons, partly the Minneapolis winters, but a lot of other things going on. And so I went for a walk in the woods, and I was just very down and had my head down and was just kind of walking along, and I was praying, but I wasn't noticing anything. I was just within myself and head down and praying. And somehow the song of a bird reached me in the midst of this kind of foggy state I was in. I don't think, I wouldn't call it true prayer, I guess. I didn't have awareness, I didn't have presence, didn't have a sense of presence. But anyway, the song of this bird reached me, and I looked up and it was right above me on the tree. And so I sort of contemplated the bird for a while, and I felt like it was sort of a messenger, you know, to stop looking down, look up, look around, be aware. And so I continued my walk in a much different state. And I felt like I was praying with nature, whereas before I was sort of praying against nature and praying against my own nature. And that bird, that song of the bird, sort of restored God's presence to me. And I continued the walk praying with nature. That was a long time ago, but this question brought back that memory. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you. If I could comment something, I think it's part of the, I think the aspect or the dynamic of the contemplative experience allows us to enter a freedom, an openness to the mystery. And I think I'm finding more and more, and maybe many of you have too, in your reference, in your reading, that I'll say it this way, the Creator is present in her creation. I had to put that in. But it's that, you know, we have projected over the centuries so much of our humanity, our gender on the divine. And we're coming to realize that all of creation is so uniquely involved, and that we're a part of that. I know, and I'm a Catholic also, and I do respect the ritual of the breaking of the bread, the Eucharist, and we say the real presence. Well, okay, yes, sacramental presence, I can grasp that and respect that. But that's just the beginning. There is so much that we have got to be able to, and I think contemplatively open ourselves to mystery that we don't know at all. We think we do, but we're in a journey to that end, that we can see the fullness of creation, not as we're living on this planet, but when we, and this is a faith stance, I would think, but there's something that we're going to experience as a Creator experiences. So that's why nature, especially since my wife and I have moved to a rural area here in the Oxford area, so much nature around, from insects to birds to coyotes, the wind, the night sky. Oh my gosh, it's just charge you with the energy of creation, and I can respect those comments. And so, other comments, reflections?
Thank you for bringing in the divine feminine. I appreciate that.
Okay. There is a book of Merton, by Merton. He's talking about the feminine divine. I don't know if they have the author. It a woman, but he is. I will try to explore that. I forget the author's name, but how Merton conceived of the feminine in the divine.
Wow, I would love to receive that.
Okay. I will give that information to Geneva.
This is Brian again.
Yes.
I think that in a lot of your comments, you can see that many of us experience God through God's reflection in the beauty of nature, from the person who is jogging around the reservoir to others who are out seeing nature itself. I know the Bible talks about the heavens declaring the glory of God,
Yeah.
and I think we each experience that in our own way. But nature has a way of bringing that to us, and I think this contemplation you're talking about, as I said earlier, has a way of opening us up to be able to receive that.
Thank you, Brian.
This paragraph, also this quotation about silence, has me and what you're talking about with nature too has me thinking, are we really talking about silence as silence? Are we talking, when I get very silent is when I can hear what's really happening. And I'm not listening then to my own thoughts and concentrating on what's going on inside my head. It's like when I'm walking, and nature, of course, invites you to a different kind of silence, but you can hear the birds and you can hear the rustle of the leaves, and you can hear the wind. And those are the realities that we can hear once we have silence.
Mhm.
There's a movie put out a long time, quite a while back. It's called Into the Great Silence, and it had to do with a monastery. I don't know if it was Carthusians or Camaldolese or
Carthusians.
whoever in France. And you had a soundtrack there. They didn't, the monks didn't talk. So the soundtrack was people sloshing their boots in the water, and the ducks quacking alongside of them, and the inside the monastery, the carts rattling down the hallways and things like that. And I think to myself, this is my life too. It's like I have soundtrack of my life, or all the little noises that I could think of as distractions. I could think of all the people that are blowing their nose in church and all of that as distractions, or I could just think of it as a soundtrack. Anyway, it's the silence that you silent myself for that allows me to hear those, and to say, this is the reality that God has for me today.
Dorothy, I think your comment makes me think too that, and I think this is the outcome of silence, or silence, physical silence, lack of noise, is taking us to a place of stillness, both externally and especially internally. If we discover the great mystery of our inner selves and being there, there's reference of monastery of the heart in some of the Benedictine Cistercian writers, especially Merton, that from the Hebrew Psalm, be still and know that I am God. That line of the Psalm 45, I believe. Yeah. It's important to experience silence when there's not a lot of the mechanical noise of our lives, of our human life. But it helps us get to a place of stillness, complete stillness. And this is where Merton learned so much in experience with his connecting with the Buddhist tradition, and how we as Christians can also benefit from that exchange and understanding and sharing experiences. You all have been sharing your experience this is tremendously what Merton was getting at. We all know a lot, we read books, but what are we experiencing? And focus more on the experience and then not trying to figure it out. That's been part of our problems that go over the centuries, especially in the West. The Eastern traditions, I think, get it. And Merton understood that. He was able to grasp that very easily. So it's a cultural experience too, and that we have to be kind to, but knowing that there's more.
It's interesting. I just recently read a review in a Catholic publication. I believe the director is Terrence Malick, and I believe he has a recent film that focuses on a man and his family in a town that was overtaken by the Nazis in World War II. And this man harped throughout this review about the fact that the movie was silent. there was not enough dialogue going on, and he was describing the man did this and the man did, and I'm thinking, yeah, that is, I believe that is the point, you know. But again, it highlighted that sensibility that without somebody telling you constantly what you're supposed to be thinking and seeing, that this reviewer seemed to feel completely, he seemed more resentful than anything else, that nobody was telling him what he was actually seeing. But my sense of it, I haven't seen the movie, my sense of it was what you were seeing was supposed to be what you were seeing. Not a lot of distraction. So that's just my 2 cents. But yes, once I did get involved in meditation, I started realizing that I felt more comfortable in solitude more of the time. Not 100% of the time. I think we all have some desire for community, and that's where I feel the conflict with church, because that's a community that, you know, traditionally I like to be part of. But it's when it starts to feel like a constant tension, I don't know, this sort of tradition seems the more important, and the other seems like I'm being forced to accommodate other people's insistence on what is right and what is wrong, as opposed to being able to, like, I would never think to tell them that my way is better than their way. But yeah, they think to tell me that my way is a sin. You know, it's like, which seems a little bit uneven, but that's my take anyway.
Thank you.
Mike, do you want me to stop the screen share, or?
Well, if that's, if there's no other question or reflection or comment, it's very appropriate to end in silence. But I think it's getting, it's been over an hour and a half or so. So
We're about an
we
hour.
can conclude.
Did you have any closing words you wanted to share or anything?
Well, I really want to express a lot of appreciation to everyone for their sharing, reflection. I think we all can connect to these experiences in so many ways. I think it's important because it helps us, continues to support our effort with community, even online. But it's difficult. But I think I also wanted to point out, if you become familiar with the information that's available at merton.org, the International Thomas Merton Society, ITMS, there are numerous Merton groups around the country. Local members of ITMS who get together and read together some of Merton's works and share reflection like we're doing, just did. So both in the United States and England especially, I know South America, and now there's some Asian communities that have started a Thomas Merton Society. But they list contact people if like Chicago, St. Louis, New York, but small communities too. Cincinnati, there is a Merton group. I used to belong to it, but when we moved to Oxford, I wasn't able to make the trip down to Cincinnati. I will share with this that I am very interested in pursuing and trying to determine interest with a Merton study group through the Interfaith Center here at Miami and Oxford with our community and Miami students. It's amazing the number of college students who are becoming more and more excited and interested in Merton. In fact, the International Thomas Merton Society, who has a conference every 3 years, has scholarships for young people to attend those sessions, where all the Merton experts get together every 3 years to give talks and presentations. So thank you all. It's been very enjoyable, and I'll have conversations with Geneva to determine maybe some future programming that may be related to Merton or other authors and do some comparative discussions about that. So again, thank you so much.
Could I say thank you very much? I'm living in Cornwall in England, and I know Merton knew Cornwall, so I've been absolutely thrilled to join with you all. And the one thing I did think I would talk about was the first time I ever was aware of God was pushing my bicycle up a hill, and the hedges were full of dandelions, and I suddenly thought, this is God. I was 15. That was a long time ago. I'm now 95, so.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you so much for allowing me to join with you. And good night from Cornwall.
Well, thank you. It was our joy too.
And thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us, for your wonderful comments, and to Mike for presenting. And yeah, if anyone is interested in the Merton study group, feel free to reach out to me and I'll relay your information to Mike. And I also want to make everyone aware that we will have on Sunday, Miami University alum Whitney Barth will be conducting a case study in conjunction with the Pluralism Project at Harvard. And if you participate in the case study, the feedback you provide will be used to plan the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in 2022. And the focus is on religious life. So if anyone's interested in that, please register. We'd love to have you. And we hope that you all have a great afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
God